In the spring of 1853, on the outskirts of Natchez, Mississippi, a new curiosity arrived at the Fairmont plantation. Her name, or what little remained of it, was Minnie. She was old, small, toothless, and half-blind, a woman who looked too frail to lift a broom, let alone labor in the cotton fields. Master Henry Fairmont, a man who delighted in the performance of cruelty, bought her not for work but for laughter. He had paid $10 for her, declaring her the perfect little entertainment for his dinner guests, a living jest to break up the monotony of their wine-soaked evenings. But Minnie did not behave as the others expected. She laughed at the wrong times, hummed to herself in an old dialect that made even the hardened field hands uneasy, and once in front of everyone called her new owner by a name no one on the plantation had ever heard. Hen. The table went silent. The name hung in the air like a ghost. Henry Fairmont had not been called that since he was a child, and only one person, one long dead figure buried deep in his past, had ever called him that. From that night on, the laughter on the Fairmont plantation died. The auction yard smelled of sweat, dust, and molasses, the kind of smell that clung to your throat long after you left. It was a Saturday morning, and the traders were already shouting over the cries of children and the crack of whips. Slaves stood on raised platforms, their bodies prodded, their teeth inspected like livestock. Henry Fairmont stood near the front, gloved hands clasped behind his back, a silk hat tilted just enough to hide the boredom in his eyes. He had come not to buy workers, his fields were already full, but to amuse his dinner companions, the kind of men who enjoyed cruelty as easily as they enjoyed cigars. "Got something special here, gentlemen," the auctioneer hollered, his voice carrying over the crowd. "A real old one, but spry. Can still talk, can still sing, and don't complain none. Look at her smile." Two handlers dragged her forward. Minnie shuffled into the light, stooped and thin, her gray hair sticking out from beneath a ragged kerchief. Her gums shone where teeth had once been, but her eyes, pale and strange, held something alive in them, something unbroken. The crowd laughed. "She ain't worth feedin'," one man shouted. "Give her a broom and call her a ghost," another jeered. But Minnie only smiled, a wide, strange smile that made her wrinkles fold like paper. "Good mornin', chillun," she said in a voice as soft as worn cloth. Henry's lip curled. "How old is she?" "Can't say, sir. Near 70, maybe 80, said the auctioneer. "They say she's from Carolina way. Got a mouth on her, though keeps talking nonsense about things that happened long before any of us was born. I'll let her go cheap." Henry raised an eyebrow. "How cheap?" $10. A snort rippled through the crowd. $10 for a ghost!" Someone laughed. Henry turned the silver coin between his fingers, amused. $10 was nothing a trifle to buy a moment's laughter. "I'll take her," he said, flipping the coin toward the block. The gavel fell with a crack, and just like that, Minnie became the property of Fairmont Plantation. The wagon ride back was silent, save for the creak of the wheels and the groan of wood. Minnie sat across from Henry, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes half closed as if she were praying. Henry leaned back, studying her. "You know where you're going, old woman?" "Yes, sir," she said softly. "I've been there before." He frowned. "You've never been to my plantation." Minnie smiled that same unnerving, empty smile. "Maybe not yours, Hen." The name dropped between them like a stone. Henry sat forward sharply. "What did you call me?" She tilted her head. "Just a name I remember, that's all. Don't you like it?" His hand twitched toward his cane, but something in her tone stopped him. He told himself it was coincidence, some senile old slaves babbling. But deep in his stomach, a long-buried unease began to stir. When they arrived, the field hands paused their work to watch. The mistress, Eleanor Fairmont, came out onto the veranda, her expression one of mild disgust. "What in heaven's name is that?" she asked, pressing a lace kerchief to her nose. "Our new entertainment," Henry said dryly. "She'll keep the guests laughing." Eleanor's eyes flicked over Minnie, unimpressed. "She looks like death itself." "Then perhaps she'll remind them how lively they are," Henry said, stepping inside. That evening, the dining hall glowed with oil lamps and laughter. Guests reclined in velvet chairs, glasses of port in hand. Henry stood at the head of the table, a showman in his own house. He clapped his hands. "Bring her in." The door opened. Minnie shuffled forward, bare feet whispering against the wood. The guests laughed at once at her size, her stoop, the way her head barely reached the table's edge. Henry grinned. "Well, Minnie, can you sing for us? Can you dance?" Minnie looked around the room, eyes sweeping over the gold and glass and smoke, and smiled faintly. "I can tell a story, master." The guests cheered. Henry gestured for her to begin. She closed her eyes and started to hum a slow, rhythmic tune that made the air itself seem to thicken. Then, in a voice that trembled but never broke, she began to speak. It was a boy, once, who liked to steal apples from his mama's kitchen. She used to call him Hen Hen when she caught him, 'cause he'd puff up like a little rooster, trying to hide what he'd done. Henry froze. The laughter faded. "How do you know that name?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Minnie looked up at him, her cloudy eyes unblinking. "Because, child," she said softly, "I was there when your mama stopped calling you that." The room went still. Henry's cane slipped from his hand. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, distant, patient, like something that had been waiting a very long time. The morning after Minnie's unsettling story, Fairmont Plantation woke in uneasy silence. The laughter that usually followed Henry's dinners had soured into muttered questions. Some of his guests had left before sunrise, claiming early business in Natchez. Others whispered about the way the old woman's song had made the lamps flicker and the air grow cold. Henry refused to speak of it. At breakfast, he dismissed his wife's probing questions with a flick of his hand and an empty smile. "Old women say foolish things," he muttered. "She'll keep to the kitchens from now on." But by the end of the week, Minnie had become the talk of the entire house. The servants said she walked the halls at night, humming that same nursery tune. They said she never slept, that she could be found sitting near the fireplace before dawn, staring into the ashes as though waiting for something to rise from them. And worst of all, she had begun calling him Hen Hen again. Never when others were around, always when they were alone. "Good mornin', Hen Hen," she'd say softly as she poured his coffee. Or, when she passed him in the hall, "Mind your step now, boy. Mama don't like scuffed boots." Each time, Henry's stomach twisted. He told himself it was mockery, a way to amuse herself before death. But she said the words with such familiarity, such fondness, that the walls of his composure began to crack. One afternoon, after returning from the stables, Henry found her in the nursery, a room that had been locked for over a decade. Dust covered the toys, the wooden cradle, the faded wallpaper painted with sheep. No one had entered since their only child had died there, 10 years before. Yet there she sat, rocking slowly in the chair near the window, humming. Henry's heart lurched. "How did you get in here?" Minnie didn't look at him. "Door was open, Hen Hen. It called me." He strode forward, seizing the back of the chair. "Don't call me that again." She turned her gaze to him, unafraid. "Your mama used to say that too, when she was angry. You got her eyes, you know. Same storm in 'em." In a line, he froze. "My mother's been dead 20 years, he said. Minnie nodded. "Mm-hmm. Dead, but not gone. Some folks don't go easy." She talked about that room, about what you done in here when you was a boy. Henry's grip on the chair tightened until his knuckles went white. "You're lying." She smiled, toothless and sad. "You took her locket, the one with the picture of the river inside." She looked for it for days. The color drained from his face. That memory, that tiny, childish theft, had never left his own head. He'd taken it from his mother's dresser, hidden it in this very room. No one had seen, no one could have seen. "How do you know that?" he whispered. Minnie rose slowly from the chair, her back bent but her presence somehow taller than his. "The river tells me things, Hen Hen, things you forgot, things you tried to bury." He stepped back. You're mad." "Maybe," she said softly, "but madness remembers." That night, Henry locked the nursery again. He drank until the edges of the world blurred and the sound of his name in her cracked voice stopped echoing in his ears. When he finally slept, he dreamed of water. He stood by the riverbank near his childhood home, the same one his mother had loved. The air smelled of rain and wild jasmine. In the water's reflection, he saw two figures, his mother and a small boy, barefoot and laughing. She reached out to touch the boy's cheek, but as her hand met the surface, the image rippled. The water darkened. Then he saw another figure, a woman with gray hair and a crooked back, watching from the trees. When she smiled, the reflection of his mother began to fade, replaced by that same toothless grin. Henry woke with a start, his sheets soaked in sweat. The following morning, he found Minnie in the kitchen again, speaking quietly with the cook. The others fell silent when he entered. "What were you saying to them?" he snapped. "Just telling stories," she said calmly. "Lies, you mean?" She tilted her head. "Ain't all stories got a bit of both?" His hand shot out before he realized it. The slap echoed through the room. Minnie staggered back but did not fall. The cook gasped. Henry's voice broke with fury. "You will never speak to me again unless I ask it. Do you understand?" Minnie lifted her gaze, and in that moment, something ancient stirred in her eyes. "You can hush a woman's mouth, but not her knowing," she said. "You can chain her tongue, but not her memory." He turned and stormed out, his pulse pounding in his ears. But that night, when he lay in bed beside his restless wife, the house began to creak. The sound came from the hall, soft, dragging footsteps moving toward his door. He sat up, clutching the lamp. The footsteps stopped outside. Then came a whisper, thin as breath through a keyhole. "Hen, you forgot to say your prayers again." The lamp went out. Henry tore open the door, but the hallway was empty. Only the smell of damp river air drifted through the cracks in the old floorboards. By morning, the servants claimed they'd heard the same thing, footsteps, whispers, laughter in the nursery. Minnie, however, was nowhere to be found. Henry ordered the property searched from the cotton fields to the slave quarters. They found her at last, sitting beneath the magnolia tree near the edge of the swamp, her hands folded, her eyes closed, humming that same old tune. When Henry demanded to know what she was doing, she looked up slowly and said, "Waitin' for you to remember, child. Waitin' for you to tell me where you buried her." He felt the world tilt beneath him. Buried who? But Minnie only smiled, and the wind stirred her gray hair like mist. "You know who," she said. "The one who used to call you my sweet hen." The blood drained from his face. He turned away, but her voice followed him, soft and certain. Secrets don't stay in the ground forever. For 3 days after Minnie's words beneath the magnolia tree, Henry avoided her. He convinced himself she was senile, delusional, perhaps playing tricks to gain sympathy. Yet her voice lived inside his mind like a seed that refused to die. "Where you buried her." He tried to busy himself with plantation work. The cotton shipments were late, the overseer drunk again, and the accounts unbalanced. But every time he dipped his pen into ink, he saw his reflection in the black surface of the bottle, his mother's eyes staring back at him. By the 4th night, sleep abandoned him entirely. The mansion was too quiet. Even the usual songs from the slave quarters had gone silent, as though the air itself was listening. When the clock struck midnight, Henry rose and lit a lamp. He found himself walking toward the nursery again, his bare feet whispering against the wooden floor. The key trembled in his hand. The lock gave way with a sigh. Inside, dust drifted like ghosts. The cradle still stood by the window, its fabric eaten by moths. The rocking chair moved slightly, though no breeze stirred. Henry stepped inside. The boards groaned beneath him, remembering his weight from years ago. Something compelled him toward the far wall, where the paint had peeled away in a faint circle. He knelt, setting down the lamp. With trembling hands, he pried at the loose boards. The smell of soil rose up wet, old, familiar. His heart pounded. He reached inside and felt something cold, metallic. When he pulled it out, his breath caught in his throat. The locket, tarnished now, its hinge stiff with age, but unmistakably his mother's, the one he'd stolen as a boy. He opened it carefully, expecting to see the miniature painting of the river, but instead, there was something new inside, a lock of gray hair tied with a thin red thread and a small scrap of paper, folded tight. His hands shook as he opened it. The words were written in his mother's delicate script. "For my Henry, the river takes what it is owed." He staggered back, the lamp flickering wildly. The words blurred before his eyes. The river, always the river. The same place where his mother had vanished one stormy night when he was 12. They'd called it an accident, though he'd never told anyone about the fight that came before, how he'd shouted, how she'd fallen, how the current had taken her before he could reach her hand. He pressed a hand to his mouth, choking on the taste of old guilt. Then he heard it, a soft humming. Coming from behind him, he turned. Minnie stood in the doorway, her silhouette haloed by the dim light of the hall. Her back was bent, but her presence filled the room like a storm. "You found it," she said. Henry's voice was a rasp. How did you know?" She walked closer, each step deliberate. "Because she told me. Your mama comes to me by the river. She tells me what you forgot, what you hid. That locket's been calling your name for years." "Stop," he whispered. "You're lying. You can't." "Can't what?" she interrupted softly. "Hear the dead? You think they stay quiet? 'Cause you locked a door?" He shook his head violently. "You're insane. You're trying to ruin me." Her expression softened with something almost like pity. "You already did that yourself, child. I just came to remind you." The air in the room grew colder. The lamp flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed everything except her eyes, faintly glinting like wet stones. "Minnie," he whispered, "what do you want from me?" "I want you to remember." And then she began to hum again, the same lullaby his mother used to sing before bed. The melody wrapped around him like a chain, dragging him backward through years he'd buried. He saw flashes, his mother's face in candlelight, her hand reaching for the locket, his childish anger, the riverbank, the storm, the scream swallowed by thunder. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. "I didn't mean to, I didn't." Minnie's hand touched his shoulder, gentle as rain. "She forgave you long ago, but forgiveness ain't the same as forgetting." He looked up, tears streaking his face. "Why you? Why did she tell you?" "'Cause I was there too," Minnie said quietly. "I worked your mama's house when you was little. She used to bring you down to the river to watch me wash linens. You'd throw pebbles and chase frogs while she told me stories about how you was going to be a good man one day." Henry stared at her, realization dawning. You knew her?" "Knew her like a sister," Minnie said. "And when she passed, I promised her I'd see you remember what kind of boy she raised. But the Lord took his time letting me find you again." The wind outside howled, rattling the windows. The rocking chair began to sway on its own. Henry rose unsteadily, the locket clutched to his chest. "Then tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I never stopped hearing her voice." Minnie smiled sadly. "You don't need me for that. She's right here, waiting by the river." He turned toward the window, where the moonlight touched the tree line beyond the fields. The river shimmered in the distance like a silver scar. When he looked back, Minnie was gone. Only the chair rocked, slow and steady. At dawn, the servants found Henry wandering down the path toward the riverbank, barefoot, still holding the locket. He didn't speak, didn't seem to see them. He knelt in the mud and stared at the water, whispering something they couldn't hear. Minnie stood behind him, silent, her eyes calm. When the overseer approached her in fear, she said only one thing: "The past don't die. It just waits for someone brave enough to face it." And with that, she turned and walked back toward the house, humming that same lullaby, soft, endless, and heavy with the memory of a boy who had finally remembered his mother's voice. The morning after Henry knelt at the river, the entire plantation changed. It wasn't sudden, not like a storm that bursts open the sky, but slow, quiet, and heavy, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. The air smelled of wet iron. The crows refused to land on the fences. Even the slaves in the field spoke in hushed tones, crossing themselves when they caught sight of the house. Something had shifted. The balance had tipped. Henry Lockhart was no longer the same man. He came back from the river soaked to the bone, his boots caked with mud, his eyes distant and hollow. When the overseer tried to speak to him, Henry only said, "The river doesn't forget." Then he locked himself in his study and didn't come out for 2 days. By the third morning, Minnie appeared at the door with a tray of food. She knocked once. No answer. Again. Nothing. She pushed the door open. Henry sat by the window, staring at the horizon. His mother's locket hung from his neck. The papers on his desk were soaked with spilled ink, the words bleeding into one another. "You should eat something," Minnie said softly. He didn't turn. "I keep hearing her voice." Minnie set the tray down, her hands steady. "That's because you ain't done listening yet." Henry turned slowly. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed red. "She forgave me, didn't she?" "That ain't for me to say," Minnie replied. "Forgiveness is between you and the river." He laughed once, a sound like cracking wood. "The river. It spoke to me. It said there's a debt still unpaid." Minnie's expression didn't change. "Then you best find what's owed." That night, a storm gathered. The sky turned a deep bruised purple, lightning flickering far beyond the fields. The slaves huddled in their quarters, whispering of curses and restless ghosts. They said the master's house was haunted not by one spirit, but by all those the Lockharts had wronged. Inside, Henry paced the halls like a man possessed. The rain hammered the windows, the wind howled through the cracks, and every door seemed to groan his name. He found himself standing once again before the locked nursery. The key still hung from his pocket. He hesitated, then turned it slowly. The door opened with a sigh. The room was colder than before, as if the storm had seeped through the walls. The cradle rocked by itself. The locket around his neck pulsed faintly with warmth, and then he saw her. At first, just a shimmer, a shape half made of shadow and light. His mother stood by the window, her hair loose, her white dress glowing faintly in the dark. Her face was gentle, but full of sorrow. "Henry," she whispered. He fell to his knees. "Mother, please. I didn't mean to." Her voice cut through him like a river's current. "You let the water take me. You turned away. But the river gives back what it takes if you're willing to pay. What do you want from me?" He sobbed. "Peace," she said simply. "For all of us." Her gaze flicked toward the fields outside, where the slave quarters stood the people his family had broken for generations. "You can't buy peace with silver, Henry. Only truth. Only justice." He followed her eyes, trembling. "What do you mean?" "Free them," she said. "End this curse before it ends you." The room darkened. The wind roared. Her shape began to fade. "Mother!" he cried, reaching out. But his hand met only air. The cradle stilled. The room went silent. By dawn, the storm had passed, but something in Henry had shifted again. He called for Minnie. "I want to free them all," he said simply. Minnie studied him, eyes sharp. "You mean that? Or is it the fever talkin'?" "I mean it." His voice trembled, but there was conviction behind it. "I've lived in my father's shadow too long. My family built this place on bones. It ends with me." Minnie nodded slowly. "Then you better be ready. Freedom don't come without a price." "I've already paid mine," he murmured. "Now the river can rest." The news spread like wildfire. By noon, the fields had gone still. No one dared move. No one dared speak above a whisper. The master was freeing them. After all the years of chains and cruelty, the overseer, a bitter man named Trask, confronted Henry by the stables. "You've lost your mind. You set them free, and this place dies." Henry turned to him, calm as glass. "Then let it die." Trask raised his whip, but before he could strike, Minnie appeared behind him, her gaze cold and unblinking. "Put that down," she said. For a moment, Trask hesitated, then something unseen passed through him, like a breath of ice. His face twisted in fear. The whip fell from his hand. He stumbled back, clutching his chest, gasping like a man drowning in invisible water. Then he collapsed into the mud. Henry stared. "What did you?" Minnie only whispered. "The river takes what it's owed." That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Henry stood before the gathered slaves. His voice shook, but he spoke from the depths of his soul. "My father built this place with cruelty. I upheld it with silence. No more. You're free, every one of you. Take what you can and go where the river leads." No one moved at first. They stared at him, uncertain, afraid it was a trick. Then Minnie stepped forward, laying a hand on his arm. "It's true," she said. "The chains are done." The crowd erupted, some wept, some sang, some fell to their knees in prayer. The sound rose like thunder, washing over the plantation. Henry looked out at them, at the faces that had known nothing but suffering, and for the first time, he felt his mother's presence not as guilt, but as peace. That night, Henry sat by the river, the locket still around his neck. Minnie joined him quietly. "She's gone now," Minnie said. "You set her spirit free." He nodded. "And the others? They'll find their way." The water shimmered under the moonlight, calm and endless. Henry closed his eyes. "Then the river's debt is paid." Minnie smiled faintly. "Maybe. But remember, the river never forgets. It just forgives." Slow. They sat in silence as the current whispered past, carrying with it the last remnants of the Lockhart curse and the first fragile promise of peace. The plantation was silent, not the silence of peace, but the heavy, hollow quiet that follows after something vast and ancient finally breaks. The fields lay untended, the cotton rotting where it grew. The quarters were empty, doors swinging open to the wind. Henry Lockhart stood on the balcony of his house, looking out across the ghost of his inheritance. For the first time since he could remember, there was no sound of orders being shouted, no overseer's whip cracking, no voices crying in the distance. Only the cicadas and the river murmuring beyond the cypress trees. Freedom, he thought, was louder than any command. Below, Minnie walked through the yard, her head held high, a scarf tied around her shoulders. She had refused to leave, even when others packed their things and followed the river road to new lives. "A place like this," she had told him, "ain't done being cleansed. Someone's got to stay to finish the prayer." Now she paused beneath the balcony and looked up. "You've been standing there since dawn," she called. "Come down. The river's waitin'." Henry hesitated, then descended the stairs. His boots sank in the wet earth. The storm had washed away the blood from the night before, but not the memories. Minnie led him down toward the swamp's edge. The trees were thick with moss, the water dark and still. Fireflies floated like wandering souls. She stopped near a cluster of stones half sunk in mud. "What is this?" Henry asked. "The old graves," she said. "From before your father built that big house. They buried folks here, the ones who died making this land fit for a Lockhart to sit his boots on." He knelt, brushing aside moss and vines. Names, barely carved into rough stone, appeared beneath his hands. Samuel, Clara, child, unnamed. Minnie's voice was low but steady. "Your family thought if they buried them deep enough, their sins would stay buried too. But the earth don't keep secrets. It remembers." Henry looked at her, the truth dawning. "This is what she meant, isn't it? My mother. The debt, unpaid." Minnie nodded. "You freed the livin', Henry, but the dead are still waitin'." A cold wind moved through the trees. The river gurgled softly, like it was listening. "What do I have to do?" he asked. "Say their names," she said. "All of them you can. Let the river take what your bloodline owes." He swallowed hard. His throat ached, his voice breaking as he spoke each name aloud, names he had read in old ledgers, whispered in fear, names that had never been spoken with respect. One by one, he called them: Samuel, Clara, Ruth, Isaiah, Miriam, Josiah, Sarah. The list seemed endless, but he kept going. Minnie joined in, her voice strong, carrying through the swamp like a hymn. When the last name faded into the night, the river stirred. Ripples spread outward, glowing faintly under the moonlight. Henry could swear he heard faint laughter, not cruel, not mocking, but light. Free, like children at play. The air grew warmer. The weight on his chest eased. "They're gone," Minnie said softly. "You set them loose." Henry sank to his knees, tears cutting clean tracks down his face. "Then it's over." "Almost," she murmured. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've carried a curse, same as your mother. But you got one thing she didn't choice. You can stay here. Let this land die with your name, or you can walk away and let it grow wild again. He looked up at her. "And you?" "I'll stay a while," Minnie said. "Till the ground remembers how to breathe." Henry nodded slowly. He understood. "Then the house is yours. Burn it if you must." "I'll not claim it again." Minnie smiled, small and sad. "You finally sound like a man who's listening." By dawn, smoke rose from the Lockhart house. It started in the hearth, caught the drapes, climbed the walls like a living thing hungry for history. The flames swallowed portraits, papers, and every trace of cruelty that had lived inside those rooms. Henry watched from the riverbank as the roof caved in, sparks flying into the morning sky. He didn't move. He didn't look back. When it was done, he turned to the water, the locket still warm against his chest. "Thank you," he whispered to his mother, to the river, to whatever force had granted him this chance. Then he walked away. Weeks passed. The ashes of the plantation cooled, and life began to creep back to the land. Grass grew where blood once stained. Birds nested in the rafters of what remained of the stables. Minnie stayed, tending the graves, planting wildflowers over them. She built a small cabin near the water and left the rest to time. Travelers passing through sometimes said they saw a woman by the river at dusk, humming to herself, the sound soft as wind through reeds. They said she spoke to the water, and sometimes it whispered back. One evening, as the sun fell red and gold over the swamp, Minnie stood at the river's edge. The current shimmered, calm and deep. "You done your part, Henry Lockhart," she said aloud. "Now rest easy. The debt's paid in full." The wind rose gently, carrying her words away. Somewhere in the rippling dark, she thought she saw a reflection, a man standing tall, whole again, smiling faintly before fading back into the light. Minnie closed her eyes. "The river never forgets," she murmured, "but sometimes it forgives." And as night settled over the water, the swamp fell silent, not with fear this time, but with peace.